Keir Starmer promised to end the asylum hotel scandal. He stood at the podium with conviction, telling the British public that under his leadership, the days of paying millions a day to house illegal migrants in hotels would be over. "We will end the asylum hotel system," he said. "We will save the taxpayer billions." And yet, here we are. Not only has the number of migrants living in hotels not decreased since Labour took power, but it has actually risen by 8,000. Let that sink in. More migrants, more taxpayer money, and absolutely zero accountability. And folks, Eamon Holmes has had enough. The veteran broadcaster didn't mince his words on GB News as he obliterated Labour's handling of the migrant hotel crisis live on air. "We'll never get anywhere with this migrant crisis unless someone gets tough," he raged. "And it's not going to happen under this government, is it?" His co-hosts looked stunned, but the sentiment was shared by many watching across the country. What was once seen as a temporary emergency measure has now turned into a multi-year operation funded by you. And the Treasury? Well, they finally admitted it. In a quietly released report from the Office for Value for Money, yes, the irony is staggering, they confirm that these hotels are here to stay for years. Why? Apparently due to global instability. But that's not the part that really has people furious. You see, while ordinary Brits are being told to tighten their belts, go without, and accept the crisis as inevitable, private firms contracted to find and run these migrant hotels are making record profits. That's right, companies making millions, exploiting a national crisis. And the government, instead of reining them in, is writing checks like it's a monopoly game. Holmes wasn't done. He turned his fury toward Labour's latest solution, a pledge to build 1.5 million new homes by 2029. On paper, it sounds good. In practice, it's fueling the scandal even more. Because those homes, the ones Starmer says are for Britain's future, they're being openly discussed as a way to reduce the use of migrant hotels. In other words, they're not for you. They're for the crisis Labour can't control. Holmes was seething. "That's not what these homes were meant for," he snapped. "They were meant for young families, key workers, Brits who have paid in and deserve a chance. But now, they're just a pressure valve for Labour's failed immigration policies." And then came Oscar Redrop, a name that might not mean much to Westminster, but outside the bubble, he's quickly becoming one of the most talked about commentators on GB News. He didn't just criticise Labour, he predicted their downfall. If this doesn't stop, if this continues unchecked, there won't be another Labour government next time around. It's that serious. His warning wasn't hyperbole. He pointed to the billions being spent daily on hotels, the growing anger across working-class communities, and the feeling that Britain is being taken for granted. The sentiment is explosive. Across the UK, social media is boiling over. Comments like, "I didn't vote for this," and "We're becoming strangers in our own country," are trending. Meanwhile, the Reform Party, once dismissed as a fringe group, is capitalising on the backlash. Nigel Farage has declared open war on Britain's teaching unions after a motion from the National Education Union was leaked to the press. The motion, to teach school children that Reform UK is a far-right and racist party. Yes, you read that correctly. The same party that received nearly 4 million votes in the last general election is now being targeted in the classroom. Farage isn't having it. "We will go to war against the teachers' unions," he vowed. Reform MPs are echoing his sentiment. Lee Anderson fumed that the NEU has abandoned all political neutrality and is now indoctrinating our youth, silencing free speech and spreading hateful rhetoric. And here's where it gets truly scandalous. Reform UK is gaining massive ground among young people. Recent mock elections in schools across the country showed shocking results. Reform won, hands down. In one school, students claimed the results were never even announced after Reform came out on top. A pupil from an independent school in Bath said everyone was involved, everyone voted, but when Reform won, The school just went quiet. They didn't want to announce it. In some regions, over 25% of students backed Farage's party. But instead of addressing why this new generation is turning away from Labour and the Tories, the educational establishment's answer is to suppress it. The same voices demanding diversity of thought and open debate are now actively working to label millions of voters as dangerous extremists. And while Labour plays identity politics and indulges in classroom witch hunts, the real issues go unresolved, like the Migrant hotel scandal, like the £5.5 million a day in taxpayer money vanishing into hotel chains' back pockets, like the millions of Brits waiting for affordable housing while government resources are redirected elsewhere. And if that wasn't enough to trigger a crisis, we have Ed Miliband back in the headlines and up to his old tricks. This time, he's pushing Labour's green energy dream with all the intensity of a man possessed. But at what cost? According to Sir Ian Duncan Smith, the price of Miliband's net zero now obsession is nothing short of slave labour. Yes, slave labour. Speaking to GB News, Sir Ian revealed that an amendment to the GB Energy Bill was put forward, one that would have banned British energy firms from using products made with forced labour, particularly from Xinjiang, China. It was simple, it was clear, it was moral, and Miliband, he's trying to overturn it. He's trying to block an amendment that bans slave labour, Duncan Smith said bluntly. Let that sink in. Labour MPs will be voting to allow slave-made products into our supply chains on Tuesday. That's the choice. The details are horrifying. Polysilicon used in solar panels, key to Labour's net zero push, is widely believed to come from Chinese forced labour camps in Xinjiang. Duncan Smith described the scene. These men, rounded up and imprisoned, are being forced to produce the parts that make Labour's green revolution possible. And yet Labour, knowing all this, wants to push ahead anyway. The government's green energy vision, Miliband's crown jewel, is now tarnished with allegations of genocide-enabling supply chains, WTO violations, and total disregard for ethical sourcing. Meanwhile, Miliband has remained suspiciously silent on the specifics. No condemnation, no outrage, no clear answer. Critics say Labour has bowed to China, with Duncan Smith warning they are in kowtow, bended knee, just to keep their net zero fantasy alive. Add to this the approval of a new Chinese super embassy in London, slap bang in the middle of the capital's communication grid. And even Britain's security services are sounding alarms. And yet, Labour trudges forward. It's a perfect storm. A government unable to control immigration, funneling billions into hotels. A housing policy that alienates working Brits. A teaching union on a crusade against political opposition. And an energy strategy built on the suffering of foreign slaves. This isn't the change people voted for. This is a betrayal of the British public from top to bottom. And the people are noticing. The Labour honeymoon is over. And as Holmes, Reddrop and Farage have all made abundantly clear, the backlash is just beginning. Starmer's credibility is hanging by a thread. The Migrant hotel scandal is only the start. And if Labour doesn't course correct fast, they may find themselves on the wrong side of a political revolution. Because when working Brits feel unheard, dismissed and betrayed, they don't stay silent, they vote.